Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really big topic, the inner workings of mainstream media.
hmm
We've got a fascinating source. It's a YouTube interview with Peter Clock. He's the editor-in-chief of the Dutch newspaper De Volkskrant.
Right.
The Learner, one of you listeners, actually flagged this conversation, and our mission today is to really unpack it. What does it tell us about the challenges and the thinking behind a major news publication?
Exactly. We're not just looking at headlines today, are we? This deep dive is more about understanding the pressures, the core principles guiding contemporary journalism.
Yeah.
And we get this through the lens of someone right at the top in Dutch media, Peter Clock. This interview, it's from De Nieuwe Herald, and it really gives a unique peek behind the curtain.
Right. We want to get into the key hurdles Clock sees, the sort of editorial philosophies shaping De Volkskrant's decision.
And the internal debates, too.
Yeah, and those internal debates plus the broader societal forces having an impact, we're kind of hunting for those aha moments, the ones that clarify the complexities of delivering news in today's world.
And what immediately grabs you, right at the start, is Clock highlighting this really distinctive feature of De Volkskrant. It's their weekly interview with someone who's reached 100 years old.
Wow, weekly.
Weekly. Been going on for almost 3 years now. It sounds simple, maybe, but it gives this powerful initial insight into the paper's commitment to a much longer view and just the incredible variety of human experiences.
Okay, let's dig into this 100-year-olds column then. Clock clearly champions it, doesn't he? He says he continuously advocates to continue it as long as possible. What's the real value he sees there?
Well, it provides this crucial counterpoint, I think, to the daily news cycle's obsession with the here and now.
Right.
Clock talks about these interviews offering long lines, giving that essential historical context that often gets lost when we're just chasing the latest story. It's about perspective,
Yeah.
literally a century's worth.
It's like getting a whole century of perspective in one conversation, isn't it? He mentions how it helps put our current worries into perspective.
Precisely. Seeing today's issues through the eyes of someone who's lived for 100 years. It naturally shifts your viewpoint.
Yeah.
And Clock emphasizes this surprising realization that, quote, every life is fascinating. It really underscores the inherent worth and interest in individual stories, however ordinary they might seem on the surface.
So a key takeaway there is Clock recognizing that people removed from the daily grind, they offer this unique, unfiltered wisdom.
Exactly. Wisdom that's often lost in the churn of the news. It suggests a deliberate effort at De Volkskrant to kind of push back against that short-term focus.
He also touches on how these centenarians, and maybe retirees generally, tend to speak more freely. Why do you think that is?
Well, they're often past the point of needing to, carefully manage their public image or stick to professional lines.
Right.
There's a certain liberation that comes with age and experience, I think. It lets them share their stories with remarkable candor.
And what kind of patterns has Clock noticed? Are there common threads emerging from these conversations?
Several, yeah. A strong theme he's observed is this fundamental trust in life, even after going through significant hardships.
Hmm.
These aren't necessarily the baby boomer stories we might expect. They're accounts from an older generation, often marked by a certain modesty and a really notable capacity to withstand pain and difficulty.
That resilience really struck me too. He contrasts it with our modern tendency to sort of avoid discomfort.
And what's fascinating is Clock pointing out how this older generation often faced hardships, emigration, war, tough living conditions as just, well, part of life.
Yeah.
They didn't always have the options for immediate relief or compensation that are maybe more common now. It raises an interesting point about how our relationship with discomfort and maybe resilience has shifted.
So moving from that really insightful look at the 100-year-olds column,
Wow.
let's turn to the inner workings of the paper itself. Clock talks about internal debates and this slightly elusive Volkskrant worldview. Is there like a single unified ideology there?
Cloak admits pinning down one worldview is a real challenge, but he highlights the ongoing daily discussions, the debates within their editorial team.
Which is diverse, he says.
Diverse in terms of age and background, yeah. But one recurring discussion point centers on diversity in a very specific area: the educational background of their staff.
Ah, the 90% gymnasium background. That's specific. For listeners, the gymnasium is a very academic track in Dutch high schools. What are the implications of that?
Well, the concern is that this predominantly academic background might unintentionally create a barrier for journalists from more varied socioeconomic backgrounds.
Okay.
Clock notes that writing well itself is a demanding skill, right? And the hiring process can naturally favor those with extensive academic training. So it's not just about the school name. It potentially shapes the shared cultural references, the assumed background knowledge, maybe even the writing style in the newsroom. Could it unintentionally alienate some readers? That's the question it raises.
And this connects to that broader trend he mentioned, declining social mobility in journalism. Fewer people starting as apprentices from working class backgrounds.
Exactly. Clock reflects on journalists like Peter DeWard, who climbed the ranks starting as an apprentice. That route is less common now. Most come through university.
So does that change affect the range of perspectives in the newsroom and ultimately in the news itself?
That's the crucial consideration, isn't it? And it leads to this debate about whether journalists need personal experience of a background to understand it. What's Clock's take?
Yeah, what does he think?
He strongly believes in empathy and professional skill. He argues a good journalist should be able to understand diverse viewpoints, even ones they don't share, like understanding PVV or forum voters.
Populist right-wing parties, yeah.
Right. And he brings up his own experiences, living in a more traditional village, his family history, as things that broaden his own understanding.
Okay, that leads into Clock's reflections on his own career. He describes his success through a social democratic lens, attributing it more to luck than just talent and hard work.
Yeah, which is interesting. If we connect this to a broader societal view, Clock suggests that acknowledging the role of chance, of luck, can actually foster more empathy.
How?
Well, maybe a stronger inclination to support those who haven't been as fortunate. It kind of challenges that purely meritocratic view, which can sometimes lead to, complacency or a reduced sense of social responsibility.
He also mentions feeling uncomfortable with moral self-satisfaction back in his student days in political circles.
Hmm.
Does that still affect him?
Apparently so. What's interesting is that this past discomfort still resonates. It can trigger a reaction in editorial meetings if he feels there's too much unchallenged agreement, too much self-congratulation.
Like an allergy to groupthink.
Sort of, yeah. It suggests a desire to keep that critical, questioning mindset alive in the newsroom.
Okay, now let's navigate this tricky area of perceived bias. The interviewer brings up the idea that De Volkskrant might be seen by some as leaning towards being a women's newspaper, maybe with a focus on feminism. How does Clock respond?
He denies any deliberate strategy behind that. His observation is that progressive voices tend to submit to their open forum pages more readily than conservative ones.
Which he regrets.
He does note that with some regret, yeah. It raises that important question about how different viewpoints actually find their way onto mainstream platforms.
And he also points out that dissenting voices are increasingly finding other platforms like YouTube, podcasts.
Right.
What are the potential consequences of that trend?
Well, looking at the bigger picture, Clock expresses concern about societal fragmentation. If people only engage with opinions that already match their own.
Echo chambers.
Exactly. It could really hinder constructive dialogue and that essential search for common ground in a diverse society.
This ties directly into the Ukraine war coverage discussion. The interviewer questions if De Volkskrant, maybe by catering to a specific audience, might miss diverse perspectives on the conflict. What's Clock's stance?
He takes a very firm stance here, aligns with the NATO perspective, clearly identifies Russia as the aggressor, and prioritizes the immense suffering of the Ukrainian people.
He strongly rejects analyses blaming NATO's past actions primarily.
Very strongly. He uses this powerful analogy.
You want about someone being attacked in the street.
That's the one. His point is, when someone's under assault, the immediate focus has to be on the victim, not debating the attacker's past grievances. He sees focusing on NATO's history in this context as a form of arrogance, especially when a nation is actively being invaded and people are suffering.
He also brings up solidarity and the danger of dehumanization.
Exactly. He stresses the importance of solidarity with Ukrainians and warns against intellectualizing or minimizing their plight. He sees the newspaper's core job as accurately depicting the war's reality, its human cost.
Rather than prescribing solutions.
Right, not prescribing specific political solutions.
This leads to that broader point. Does media just report, or does it also shape and legitimize narratives? What's Clock's view?
Clock disagrees with the idea that their main function is to prescribe or legitimize. He really stresses their goal is to describe events truthfully as best they can and empower readers to form their own informed opinions.
Okay. Navigating difficult debates is another key thing. He mentions the Groningen gas field, other sensitive topics. What makes these so challenging for a newspaper?
What's insightful there is his acknowledgement that some debates have significant real-world consequences. They're deeply sensitive, especially for those directly affected. Clark talks about feeling a strong sense of responsibility.
And the potential impact of just raising certain questions.
Exactly. He mentions this internal tension, this pull between wanting open debate and the risk of inadvertently creating a new reality just by asking certain things.
Can you give an example?
He refers to past controversies, like the nitrogen emissions debate. He mentioned how the paper initially aligned with government policy and later reflected on that coverage. It highlights that delicate balance media has to strike.
Fostering discussion versus potentially shaping outcomes.
Precise.
The conversation apparently gets quite intense around Clark's past statements during the COVID-19 pandemic. What's the core of that?
Yeah, that really underscores the sensitivity, doesn't it? And the different ways media coverage gets interpreted during a crisis.
How did Clark defend himself?
He defends his stance as advocating for unity during a time of huge uncertainty, not just blindly endorsing every policy. It really highlights the intense scrutiny media face in those situations and the challenge of balancing perspectives during a crisis.
Okay, the discussion then shifts to columnists and the diversity of voices at De Volkskrant. The interviewer notes a perceived lack of conservative voices. What's Clark's explanation again?
He basically reiterates the challenge of attracting conservative voices to their specific platform. As we touched on, those voices often find other avenues now, alternative media.
But he still sees debate as important.
Absolutely. He emphasizes the fundamental importance of debate and diverse viewpoints, even if progressive perspectives are offered more readily to them.
He mentions Sander Schimmelpenninck. Why is he significant here?
Well, Schimmelpenninck is known for provoking strong reactions, often with contrarian views, but his perspective resonates with some readers.
Okay.
And Clark acknowledges they don't really have an equally prominent voice offering a counterpoint from the other side of the spectrum in their opinion pages.
Book reviews and cultural coverage also come up. Is there a feeling this has changed over time at De Volkskrant?
The interviewer raises that question, yeah? Suggests a possible decline in quantity or quality of book reviews. But Clark points to a recent expansion under a new literary editor, Just de Vries.
And he mentioned a shift in their approach to reviews too, didn't he?
Yeah, what's interesting is Clark's preference for reviews that are more like discussions about the books, rather than just purely evaluative judgments.
Like thumbs up, thumbs down.
Exactly. They've even stopped using star ratings for books. He sees it as an overly simplistic kind of forced objectification of something subjective.
The interviewer then suggests a left progressive flavor to the paper, using economic reporting as an example. What's the specific critique there?
The critique is a perceived lack of deep scrutiny of the corporate world, especially compared to specialist outlets like Follow the Money.
And Clark's response.
He acknowledges resource limits and the strategic choices they make in economic coverage. They focus on areas like the housing market, the energy transition.
He also draws a distinction between their style and Follow the Money's more confrontational style.
Yeah, he uses that Malcolm Gladwell analogy, puzzles versus mysteries.
Right.
Suggesting Follow the Money often goes for the puzzle, finding the clear culprit, while De Volkskrant aims more for the mystery, unraveling complexities, looking at broader factors.
The departure of columnist Martin Sommer is also discussed, seen as a critical voice against left progressive assumptions.
That's how he was often perceived, yeah. Clark actually says he was a big Martin Sommer fan and defended his presence at the paper.
So why did he leave? Or rather, what's the impact?
Clark acknowledges it's hard to find a direct replacement with that same critical perspective. Sommer moved to Elsevier, which is seen as more right-leaning. It highlights the ongoing debate within the paper about political commentary.
This brings us back to the editor's core philosophy, navigating ideology and truth. What's Clark's main aim?
He reiterates his primary goal, produce a newspaper that accurately describes the world, letting readers form their own judgments, not pushing a specific agenda.
But he admits unintended bias is possible.
He does, yeah. Acknowledges the potential for it through various factors.
The idea of falsification from Karl Popper comes up. Being open to criticism. Does Clark think media outlets are good at criticizing themselves?
Clark maintains he personally is open to criticism, pointing to his reactions during the interview as evidence. But it does raise that bigger question about the media's overall capacity for self-critique.
Clark also voices concern about the constant attacks on mainstream media. Why does he see this as damaging?
He views these ongoing attacks as potentially really detrimental to the health of democracy. He strongly defends de Volkskrant's integrity and argues for the vital role of a strong, independent media in the Netherlands.
And social media's role in this, the amplification of outrage.
Yeah, he highlights the negative impact of social media algorithms, how they amplify extreme views, create these binary black and white discussions,
Making nuance difficult.
incredibly difficult. And he sees that as ultimately harmful to productive democratic debate.
The challenge of covering someone like Trump comes up too. That balance between constructive analysis and critical reporting. What's the dilemma there for an editor?
The core dilemma seems to be finding that balance between, thoughtfully analyzing policies and actions versus directly addressing what are seen as fundamental challenges to democratic norms or human rights.
And where does Kwok lean?
He seems to lean towards prioritizing the immediate impact of those actions.
So all of this seems to boil down to a central tension for Kwok, doesn't it? Freedom of debate versus societal impact.
Exactly. That seems to be the critical point he's grappling with. How widely, how freely can you open up discussions without unintentionally empowering harmful ideologies or undermining crucial institutions?
He gave examples, right, like questioning the Refugee Convention.
Yeah, or criticizing a Supreme Court ruling on wealth tax. The fear is that simply raising those questions, even in good faith, could lend legitimacy to potentially damaging viewpoints or erode trust.
The interviewer uses that interesting analogy. Kwok's personal views might be more Lutheran, clear and assertive, while his editor role requires a more Erasmian, balanced approach.
Right, considering multiple sides.
Mhm.
Clark acknowledges that potential tension within himself.
And this leads to talking about Stefan Zweig's biography of Erasmus. What's the parallel drawn there?
The key takeaway is this tragic portrayal of Erasmus, the humanist, ultimately failing to bridge the divides during the Reformation.
A parallel to today's polarization.
Precisely. It highlights the difficulty of holding the middle ground now, and it raises that challenging question. In the face of such fragmentation, is a more decisive, maybe Lutheran stance sometimes needed?
Kwok also emphasizes the value of the Volkskrant magazine for fostering empathy. Why is that so important to him?
He sees it playing a vital role in building human connection through personal stories, letting readers understand diverse experiences, connect on a human level.
Gender dynamics get a brief mention too. The interviewer noted perceiving a sometimes negative portrayal of men.
Yeah, a brief observation. Clark acknowledges that gender roles becoming more fluid is positive, generally. But he also recognizes the complexity, the challenges this might pose for people who find traditional distinctions more grounding.
Okay, nearly there. Finally, shareholder influence, budget constraints. How much autonomy does Kwok actually have?
He describes a significant degree of autonomy for editors-in-chief in the Netherlands. The main constraint is budgetary, linked to circulation numbers.
So, editorial independence is seen as an asset.
A critical asset for a quality newspaper, yeah.
Yeah.
That seems to be the understanding.
All right, let's wrap this up with some key takeaways for you, the learner.
Okay, firstly, it's crystal clear that mainstream media operates in a really tough environment. Constant scrutiny, criticism.
Yeah.
Editors like Clark are navigating these incredibly complex internal debates. Diversity, ideological balance, the very purpose of journalism today.
And we definitely saw that ongoing tension, didn't we? Between the ideal of totally open debate and the potential real-world consequences, especially eroding trust in institutions or making divisions worse.
Absolutely, and the impact of social media is huge,
Yeah.
amplifying polarization, making nuance so much harder. And finally,
Mhm.
it's important to remember, even inside one newsroom, you'll find different personal views, different philosophies on how best to serve the public.
Some surprising things we picked up. I thought the enduring popularity and the kind of philosophical weight of that 100-year-old's column was fascinating.
Me too. And the surprisingly similar educational backgrounds of many journalists at major Dutch papers.
Yeah, that was striking. And Klock's own view on luck versus merit in his career. Plus, those active internal debates about balance and covering sensitive stuff like Ukraine or migration.
So understanding these dynamics gives you, the learner, a really valuable framework, I think, for critically evaluating the news you consume, appreciating the tough choices media professionals face.
It really highlights why seeking out diverse perspectives yourself is so important and being aware of all the forces shaping the information we get. So here's a final thought for you to mull over, the learner. Given all these challenges maintaining balance, the polarization, the social media effect, what role can individual news consumers like yourself actually play in fostering a more informed, more constructive public conversation? What responsibility do we have to seek out different views, engage thoughtfully, and resist just retreating into those echo
So
chambers?
definitely something to think about.